Cool. So the precursor and the rules are, it's your podcast, not ours. We've just brought the kit. We can talk about anything you want to talk about. It's totally up to you. Whatever way you go. Some people have just talked about purely the hardships of business. Some people have talked about the actual making of it. Totally up to you. We've no preference at all. It's all yours.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something that people don't know about necessarily, so it probably makes sense to actually talk about how we work in a way.
Absolutely.
And, and I guess it's that thing of doing something very I used to apologise for the size of, how we worked, and then you realise there are certain products that you can only make at a certain scale, so it's kind of nice to talk about that.
Yeah,
exactly. I mean, like, for us, one of the things was just I envisaged distillery. I'm like, even as a micro distillery, you're going to need like a lot of space, and then it's a lean-to in the back garden, and then a garage to hold, and it's awesome. So I think we'll definitely get onto all that for sure. And I've got a question about the stills.
Cool, perfect.
But I'll go into like engineering rabbit holes. That seems to be my thing. Kate's good at the emotion and the why. I like the engineering side of it.
It's perfect. I'm geeky enough to talk about both.
Good.
Geeky and romantic.
Yeah.
So.
Perfect harmony.
So I think the opening question... Oh, I feel a bit out of practice. The opening question, what is Capreolus Distillery?
So we are a very small distillery based in the Cotswolds. We're incredibly unusual in that our focus is on making eau de vie, and eau de vie are fruit brandies, so fermented, distilled, and essentially capturing that essence of our local fruits in the area. But it's something no one does in the UK. I think I often say that no one else is stupid enough to do it, because they are incredibly demanding, incredibly detailed things to make, but they can be beautiful. So we didn't introduce me. I'm Barney Wilczak, and we set this up from my childhood home, and it's a very strange thing to be doing, and yet we are very lucky that we get to work with some amazing people around the world.
Yeah.
So in the garden, where we set this up, we've hand graded 50,000 kilos of fruit this year.
That's incredible.
Which is an amazing amount. It was a 4-month harvest with a 6-month-old baby now. So there's a reason I have bags under my eyes.
Yeah.
And then in the garden, we have the old greenhouse, which now has 2 stills going into it, 3 households worth of renewably sourced electricity, and double garages and excise warehouse, and then they kind of disappear into the ether from where we see them and end up in some amazing places like 3-star restaurants around the world. So we're very lucky.
Yeah, I don't know if it's luck, because the conversation we've had, you've certainly worked very, very hard for it. So where did it all start? What was it that it was? So you talk a little bit about what you've done before, and then how you transferred into this.
Yeah, so I used to be a photojournalist, and I specialised in conservation stories. So last big project I did was creating a media library for botanic gardens in 118 countries of landscape restoration on 6 continents, which was incredible to do. It's a terrible way to make a living, like so many things artistic. But I had this slightly illicit hobby for 6 or 7 years, all of that time of being a photojournalist, of distilling fruit. And this had come from making ciders to high levels, so doing things like champagne method ciders, and then thinking, well, what happens if I distill this? And what was amazing is, because we're in such a historically rich fruit area, and this is the house where I grew up from a baby, suddenly we're distilling these things which they smell like places I grew up. They smell like orchards. They taste like taking that fruit at that day of ripeness. And more than that, because we're compressing so much, and we can talk about this in more detail, into such a small space, these are absolute perfumes, and they suddenly amplify these aromas and flavours that you don't even perceive in that raw fruit, and they connect you even more to this climate, this landscape, and the fruits that are growing here.
Yeah. Well, let's start with that. Exactly. That's the sort of the perfume aspect of it, and how, because one of the things that when we had the walk around, it totally blew my mind is the sheer volume of fruit you need to make the minuscule volume of eau de vie that you're making.
Absolutely. So it's a very unusual way, and coming from that photography background where, I had not my midlife. I'm hoping it's not my midlife at 30 when I decided this, but I'd done a story on the Burmese border in China, came back, realised I'd missed all the spring flowers I love, I couldn't have a dog, most important thing.
Yep.
Didn't get enough time with my partner Hannah, and I thought, God, what do I do? And having an eau de vie distillery is crazy. We made a very complex gin, but actually...
So I think most people at that stage in life that are trying to get home and have a dog, look at local jobs, sign up to CV Library, maybe look at something a little bit closer to home. Maybe they don't think about setting up a distillery.
Absolutely. I mean, it seemed to make sense at the time. When you're doing 3-year-long stories that don't pay, it's quite liberating because you're not stepping away from a big money job. And, I had started making these things, and, in a way that I'm kind of overly fond of describing us and winemakers as fruit squashers, because what we're doing is something that's very elegant, very simple, but like all of these crafts, they take lots of simple steps to make something very refined at the end. So what we do is we have fruit arrive. We only work within 50 miles, and that means that...
15.
No, 50.
50. 50. Yeah.
But I think over 90% of our fruits from within 30 miles.
Wow.
It's incredibly easy to say that you're terroir driven when you have such a kind of plethora of resources, and there's so many pears and apples and plums that come from this area. And, we're really lucky that we get to work with these very small farmers that are very focused on farming in a biodiverse way. And we take that fruit, not when we want it, just like with grapes, we're taking them on that absolute day of ripeness. Logistically, this is mad.
Yeah,
we were expecting, for example, 2 tons of raspberries one Monday morning, and we had the phone call and said, can you take 4.3? And it was a 13-hour day sorting with 3 shifts of people, and it's a very reactive thing. And what we're doing is that fruit's coming in, and we're trying to extract this absolute essence. So the way we do that is we're taking it, we hand grade every single piece, and for me this is very important. So one of our young assistants, Sebastian, said, why can't we have a conveyor for the sorting table? And I said, well, visually I can see 70% of the fruit that's not right. The other 30%, when I feel it and I feel that ripeness, suddenly, something like a peri-pear can become too doughy. And only by actually touching every single piece of fruit we work with are we able to have the quality for what are essentially my own fantasy spirits. So fruits sorted by hand, those raspberries, we were walking our fingers through, removing every stalk, every leaf, every flawed berry, because we don't want to compress these things. And then these things are fermented. So they're crushed, placed in fermenters, and then only that wild yeast that's come from those orchards, no additions whatsoever. Very simple approach, and we don't rush these fermentations. So we were talking about this earlier with whiskey. Long fermentations are 3 days. Well, for us, fermentations are anywhere from 9 days to over 12 weeks. So again, trying to respect that fruit, very carefully treating it. And then we distill. And distilling is basically boiling these fruits. And all of the alcohol and aroma evaporates out. And we capture this. And we triple distill. And that means that in this 180 litre still, on that last run, we can have the equivalent of up to 3,000 kilos. So that's about 3,000 litres crushed of fruit in there. And we end up with about 50 litres in a can. You know, so we tried earlier the raspberry out of the can at distillation strength, which is strong, just over 80%. But actually, we were looking at over 60 kilos of fruit in each litre. You know, and when we kind of look at places like Grasse in France, where they were traditionally producing these perfumes and they were trying to extract this absolute pure essence, it's so similar and so different to distillation that we commonly see. And even in fruit distilling, working in this way with low yielding fruits is, I can think of less than my two hands worth of producers that work in this way in the world that I know of, because it's easier to soak fruits in neutral alcohol, take a half a kilo to 3 kilos. Squeezing up to 45 kilos into a litre is madness. And
you sound like you've got a lot of patience. This takes a lot of patience and just care. That's one of the big things as well. You take a lot of care over your product, and that's what makes it so unique to me.
It's a very good fruit distillers to me are all slightly obsessive, but you make these products for yourself. You know, you make these things, and I think this is the way when, you know, especially all the producers you're looking at, we all share the same DNA where you go, well, I want to produce this thing and I want to work in a certain way. And how do you make a living out of that? Yeah. And that's a really, really hard thing. You know, I was at art college and they taught me everything except for how to make money. You know, and exactly. And like, you know, it's this thing where you have to understand that I've been distilling for 12 or 13 years. Well, it took me 10 years before I'd drink our commercial eau de vie at home. You know, because you want it to be the best you possibly can. And what we forget as producers is that time and that effort and that kind of experience.
And that's what people are buying when they buy that product. That's taking you that amount of time. Yeah,
you know, and it either means I'm a really crap distiller that takes a long time to learn, or, you know, that these things are incredibly rare and incredibly challenging. And, you know, before we kind of went on there, it was that thing of realizing that actually there are certain products like these that are so finite, and especially if you work in this terroir driven way where you say, well, we'll only source top quality fruit within this area. These things can never be made at scale, you know, and I always describe them as the Fabergé eggs of spirits, because, you know, they're incredibly precious, they're incredibly hard to produce, they're very delicate, but they're very rare, you know, and this is what makes them wonderful, because, you know, for me, extracting a few hundred bottles of eau de vie, you know, from some fruits every year, every drink I have is still incredibly special, you know, because they're unique every year.
Yeah, I think one of the important things there is, you know, you made them for the eau de vies that you would want to drink. And a great example of that was Holly Cooper. You know, Holly Cooper was... So we went back to visit her on the basis that our business had changed so much. So she's a ceramicist that we featured in the first edition. And, you know, by all means, she enjoyed it, she loved it. But I think she started to feel a bit disenfranchised. I hope I'm not talking out of turn, but feel a bit disenfranchised by it all, until she was like, no, wait, this is my business. I'm doing it my way.
Yeah.
And then fell in love with it again.
Absolutely.
You know? And I think if people can take anything from this one, I'm sure they'll take a lot from this one, but the first point would be, like, do it your way. You know, do it like this is your chance to make your stamp on the world without a boss. Like, you know how valuable that is. So do it your way.
There's been a few really liberating things for the way we produce, in that I worked maybe in the first year or two, you know, for example, we did more barrel aging because I thought it'd be more popular, or we did this. And then I realised that what we were doing was so uncommercial that it didn't matter what we did. You know,
right.
There's also that realisation that, you know, we all want to, I think when we're younger, we all want to change the world in one action, you know, like, you know, coming from a conservation background, you want to do that thing that, you know,
makes a difference.
Yeah, and you see this big difference. The reality is, you know, one of the most liberating things for me was actually all people care about you being is happy. You know, happy and secure, and that's fine. No one really cares what you do, so you may as well just go and do what you love doing. You know, go and do something that, yes, you know, you've got to price it in a way that these aren't making us millionaires, but, you know, we have to, you know, put food on the table, and we have to work in a way which is sustainable, because there's nothing worse than seeing someone do something they love and then unable to do it because they can't make the money. But, you know, this is you know, this is the wonderful thing. And I think it's this thing for us with a lot of small producers working in a similar way, where there doesn't have to be a marketing line. You tell people what you do, and if you're doing something with enough care and passion, that is your marketing. You know, that is everything.
So true. So true.
You know, and for us, we go and tell people these stupid, ridiculous ways of working, but, you know, that are ultimately squashing fruit, and yet they can feel incredibly profound in their results, you know, and they can be absolutely magical, and magical for me. And I think that's enough that, you know, we can, you know, so I'm English enough that I apologise for doing something I love and finding that other people like it, you know, and, you know, because you feel embarrassed almost going, well, I'm kind of doing this for myself. And, you know, you
guys are paying me to do what I enjoy.
Yeah, exactly. And like it kind of going into this very odd juxtaposition of going into a very high-end restaurant where, you know, it's not accessible for a lot of us because, you know, some of the products they're working with, the pricing isn't necessarily the issue. But it's very odd to kind of go from that juxtaposition of sitting in a shed in the garden in the Cotswolds to going and sitting in, you know, one of the world's most exclusive restaurants or somewhere like this, you know, and going, oh yeah, we hand labelled that on the dining room table, didn't we? And and, you know, that spirit's
on
matured.
this very table.
Yeah, exactly. And that spirit's matured in my dad's garage, you know, which is our excise warehouse, you know, and I think that's
it's very special.
Yeah.
You don't hear it every day, do you?
No, you don't hear it every day. But, you know, like we were talking about earlier, like, it wasn't that long ago that that's how everything was done. You know, like, you didn't have to have a factory space to do it. Like, clothes were made in the back of the farmhouse. You know, like, this is kind of how it was all, to me, how it was all made. You know, and how the good things came about and how good quality came about, because there seemed to be, it's just less of a rush, isn't it? Yeah. Less of a rush to do things. And it's quite interesting with your craft, because it doesn't feel like there's any area to rush it. And with a lot of the people we speak to are the same, you know, there's not any corners to cut in these fields.
Absolutely. And I think this is one of the things that you realise when you're doing these very precise, challenging things, and you go, well, you know, the biggest thing I discovered, you know, about trying to make a lot of these processes more efficient is there's no way to make these processes more efficient and maintain quality. This year we actually bought a powered forklift. I decided that using a manual pulling metal frame with 50 tons of fruit was probably not the thing to do with a baby as well, that I was then picking up at the end of the day. You know, so yes, a little bit of mechanisation, a little bit of manual handling helps. But, you know, back to that thing where you're saying, well, we're doing stuff with our hands, and you guys have this lovely theme with the magazine, where you're seeing people's hands, because actually we're down to these processes where you can't automate them, you can't have that level of detail. Even these decisions where we're making purely sensory-based decisions on tasting and nosing and deciding what goes in there, and you go, well, actually, there's still no machine that can actually do this in any kind of way that makes any sense to make a correct decision. And there's no correct. These are very similar to my photography background. You have that technical knowledge in the back of your head, and then you place yourself in this situation to capture that moment and capture it and interpret it and have your own expression on it. But these things are special because of the detail, and
absolutely,
it would be, I was going to say, it would be lovely if I could find a way around this, but it's not true, because actually I still love doing it, and it's that, there's all the emails and me sitting there replying to all the Instagram things when you're setting up, and but actually there's something lovely about having several tons of fruit on the drive, and knowing that actually all you have to do by the end of that day is treat it well, sort it, and you're seeing that potential of that quality in there as well. And that's the other thing where you go, we made that decision long ago to go, it's not worth being there till 9 o'clock sorting out 30% of the fruit. Don't try to work with loads, try to work with the absolute best, and this makes it a joy, because you come in at the weekend when actually you want to be having a lie-in, and you look at what you're working with and you're like, okay, wow, this is going to be phenomenal, so
which it is.
It absolutely is.
I feel like I should pour something into a glass for you so you can smell along. I'm gonna give you some of this. So quince is my love and my hate, and
I love that sound. Pop.
I know it's the most satisfying thing.
So why eau de vie?
So eau de vie, and back to kind of that explanation of what this is, because people's experience is that awful kind of après ski, Poire Williams or grappa, and for a start, eau de vie, water of life, but many different names across Europe. So schnapps, don't think of those horrible artificial liqueurs, actually proper fruit brandies, Edelbrands, Slivovitz, even cognac, Calvados, grappa, many different names, Palinka, Rakia, and for me, distilling these things and being really interested in botany, being interested in plants, where you're going, okay, those first initial experiments where I started distilling them, and you're like, oh, yes, this smells like apples. And yet this refining down, where you suddenly had this connection to more of these plants. Every time you distill a fruit, a new fruit, or even the fruits from different vintages that you've worked with before from those orchards, it's always surprising. And for me, this is an amazing thing. And the quince I've just poured is a nice example, because this takes about 29 kilos of fruit to make a litre. This is the last vintage before I bought the, we talk about these very exciting bits of kit who are exciting to no one else. But before I had a scrubbing machine built for us, which cost about $9,000. Quinces are very hard to work with because they have a fluff on them, which can go rancid it has an essential in it that can go rancid if you distill it. So this was 4 of us hand cleaning 2.3 tons of quinces for 3 days to make 200 bottles.
2.3 tons, so a large, like a transit van. That's a transit van's worth of weight. Scrubbing that for 200 of those.
Probably a transit van and a half. And we're probably looking at 15,000 fruits cleaned by hand.
It's incredible.
It's insane. And unlike this typical way of making it by soaking it in neutral alcohol, only working from that fermentation, 3 months fermentation, 29 kilos in a litre. Yeah. But the magic is, and I'm tantalisingly still holding this, I'll pass it over. You know, these are one of these fruits that because we only ever have them as cooked, we never truly experience the essence of that in an unadulterated way. So it's been sweetened, it's been caramelized. Where that distillation is capturing something which, it smells like perfume. It's so concentrated. And it's built out of so many detailed layers. And instead of being sweet like a membrillo, you know, this paste you have with cheese, you know, like classically with manchego, it's not just sweet. Those essential oils are sweet and savoury and herbaceous and herbal and taste of rosewater and lemon zest and apples and pears. And it's something that evolves on your palate and evolves on your nose. And
it's totally different for the first sip.
Yeah.
Sip.
Totally
different.
Scotch my throat.
It does taste totally different, though, isn't it? And why is that? That something like that's could all of your stuff, you don't add anything either end, is it? It's purely just the fruit and the fermentation. There's no additional yeast, there's no additional sugars, nothing.
No enzymes even to help with pumpability, no enzymes to release aromas, you know, very simple.
When you say pumpability, is that as it sounds, like to be able to pump it?
Exactly, because we're working from the whole fruit, which we're crushing and fermenting, and something like a quince is incredibly dry. So last year I found, because it was a dry year, they wouldn't pump at all. So that was me digging them out by hand.
Really?
But again, it's this level of detail where you go, actually, for me, that elegance trumps that convenience, and why add these things which might over-extract flavours we don't want. So we put a little bit more muscle in, we add a little bit more water if we need to, we can do the extra distillation, we can be a little less efficient. But what you end up with is something that's just so much more special, you know, and so much more complex than, you know, for example, rushing things along by adding cultivated yeast that would ferment it in 5 days if we added enough. Right. Where if you take this time and you suddenly have this succession of yeasts and this actual natural selection, even within that fermentation, all of these different microflora are producing different flavours, and suddenly these layers and this complexity is just being lifted and lifted and lifted. Is it the most sensible way to work? Probably not. Is it an exciting way to work? Definitely.
I think that's what's important, though.
And that's always the way you set out to do it, wasn't it?
Yeah.
You always set out to do it, right?
Yeah, I mean, in the very long and distant past, you know, I've played with these things. And going back even before distilling, when I started making cider, that was always with wild yeasts. And I kind of realised that, you know, these things were always more complex. I never really had any bad results. And I thought, well, why am I adding all of these things, you know, like a lab kit, when, you know, actually you have this strong technical knowledge and you go, well, actually, if we work with acidity in fruits, which protects them from bacteria, if we're lucky, we're in a wet, damp, cold area, you know, so we have high acidity, and that means that these things are protected when they're fermenting. You treat the fruit really well, you hand grade it all, you only have absolutely ideal fruit in there, and that doesn't mean it looks like you get in the supermarket, but it's truly ripe, it's beautiful, there's no rot, there's no overripeness.
And that's all back to that process, the hand sorting, the feeling things, the looking at things.
Exactly that, you know, and what you get, you know, and we're talking 800, 900 grams in a 25 ml measure, you know, equivalent of fruit, the essence from that fruit in there. And anyone listening to this, please go and stand in the supermarket and start weighing this stuff and
see how many punnets or raspberries it actually is.
Exactly. I mean, we were asked by Le Manoir at Cat Saison, which is this incredible 2-star Michelin restaurant and hotel, to produce a pear eau de vie from them. And this Monday I distilled it. And from 300 kilos of pears they gave us, we had 7.9 litres in that can. And I'm jumping up and down because I was like, this is a terrific yield. This only took 19.5 kilos of fruit to make a litre.
What's that, 20 bottles? 22 bottles, something like that?
So that's...
litres a bottle?
It's, we bottle in 375ml bottles, so half bottles, so it's about 40 bottles, so about 20 bottles of wine's worth. You know, if you were making wine, you'd be, getting several hundred bottles out of
wow.
that. You know, so it's a very... But, you know, all of this is irrelevant because when I was tasting that spirit coming off that still, it was incredible because I was tasting it and I was going, I can feel that texture of the skin on my palate. I can feel the core, you know, and you're feeling all of these floral notes and all of these incredible fruit notes, but also this elevation, which is actually extending that fruit by, again, this elevation of those flavours you don't normally taste in that fruit because they're at too lower level. So suddenly, again, it's this connection to the plant and it's the connection to that landscape. And these things become so much more than, you know, what you taste when you pick up a pear and bite into it.
And is that something that's often the case for you guys where a restaurant will approach you for something like that? Or is that the first time you've done it? Is it something you would do again?
We are... we work very closely with restaurants, and one of the things we worry about, which is a good problem, is allocations. So we're talking to people about what they're using and where they're using it. With Le Manoir, again, actually, we produced a blackberry eau de vie, which they're using in duck dishes at the moment. So they're adding it as pure essence to their jus and soaking blackberries. And it was an interesting kind of introduction because we actually got into the restaurant first through the kitchen because they tasted the eau de vies and they said, well, we've never been able to find anything like pure essences like these to cook with. And you know, for me, that's an amazing thing, these kind of worlds where
especially a restaurant that's so high up there. They've not tried 3 or 4 and said they couldn't find it. They've tried everything they thought was available.
It's, and it's another world. And, you know, it's amazing for somewhere like that for us to work with because they have a head orchardist and you kind of go, how many restaurants actually have a head orchardist, you know, working there and have this huge, but, you know...
And is that, as it sounds, someone that looks after the orchard?
Yeah.
Wow.
So Paula is an amazing grower, you know, and Raymond Blanc, who's the chef patron, he's incredibly keen on preserving some of these heritage crops, you know, and we have a very similar approach, you know, to what we want to work with and, you know, again, working with a lot of these endemic varieties, and it's it's amazing that, you know, they are looking to preserve these things, and those 300 kilos had 50 varieties of pears in. So I mean, it's not as much as you tried earlier. We do a field blend of 1,000 varieties of apples, you know, so that they're slacking a little bit, but you know. No, but it's amazing. They have incredible resources and they have this, you know, but again, it's lovely working with producers like this because, you know, producers, consumers at the same time, because we as a small producer, you know, are on a much lower end of the budget scale. You know, we're a small family business. There's... my dad helps as unpaid labour. My partner, Hannah, pre-baby, was here helping us, and we have 2 part-time employees. So, you know, compared to a huge hotel and huge gardens. But I think the lovely thing where we are is actually working at that end of hospitality is people work with products they care about, you know, and, you know, the reason it's lovely for us to work with sommeliers and bartenders at that end is that they only buy stuff that they're excited about as a general rule. And for us, they are, our biggest allies, because they're communicating the value. But again, we're kind of back to that absolute kind of bemusement of going, well, this is like, one of the top restaurants in the UK, and they're asking us to make their first ever exclusive eau de vie.
Well, that's it. They're not just asking to buy your stuff in.
They want you to
They're fully investing in you. Barney, make us something.
Yes, yeah, and that's amazing. And it's a bit like we were talking about we were talking about photography earlier, weren't we? And we were saying that, and film shoots, and the reality of when you look around, it's mess everywhere. And I was sat in our 7.5 square meter distillery, and it was absolutely tipping down with rain on Monday. So I'd bought all of these things in, so I could barely move in there. And I'm sat there, squeezed in with my knees against the still to keep warm. And it's a very strange thing, as a producer. And, again, you're going to these places where you want to work in that particular way, but you go, it still seems very abstract to me that then those bottles will end up on those tables. So it's a lovely thing, and it's a lovely grounding thing as well, that you realise that when we meet small makers that are doing the really, really incredible stuff, quite often they're doing them from tiny little studios. Yeah, a few square meters.
There's quite a few makers that come to me like, I say, you should film yourself in your studio and whatnot. And I goes, no, I don't want to share it. It's just my kitchen table. I'm like, yeah, but that's how a lot of people are doing it. Like, don't be afraid to show.
Yeah, we're sat here podcasting from Capreolus Distillery's labelling plant.
Yeah, exactly. The kitchen table. Yeah, exactly.
And that is what it is. And
it's just so honest.
It is honest, and I think it just goes to show that people buy the story, people buy good products. It doesn't matter how it gets there. As long as it's done well and it's done with care, that's what people are interested in.
Absolutely. And I think this is also the thing of, we've suddenly hit this point where we're still incredibly insignificant in the world. And I love that anonymity. That's also great. But also we have enough support in the world that we can look at the future. And that's an interesting thing as a small producer, so we're looking at the moment at, buying or a lifetime lease of some farmland around us, and it means we'll be taking on 3 or 4 acres, and we can farm. I want to plant a quince orchard. I want to plant a mulberry orchard, which will be probably 20 years until we get a crop. But it's because really? I want to work with that a few times in my lifetime. I'm 38 now, so I'm, now is the time. But it's also that thing of kind of going, well, why do people love what you do? And for us, it's care, it's attention to detail, that totally that word passion, which has become so overused.
I know what you mean. So what other word can you use?
Yeah, exactly. And it's the constant pitch of, actually how whatever quality we work to, but for want of a better word, that passion. How do you maintain that, and how do you maintain, this value? And for us, it's that strange thing. We've suddenly gone from looking at just like bits of equipment to be that next bottleneck and going, God, how do you want the next 25 years to look? And you have to realise the value of what you do, and you say, well, I used to apologise for the scale we were at, and then, we were saying earlier about this, that you realise you can't do this at scale, and you go, well, okay, if we're going to put up a building and we have to think about, this is as much as the environment we want to be in for the next 25 years. We have our, young daughter who will not be young, but, or as young, and you think, well, actually, if we want to bring her into work, what environment do we want that to be? And you go, well, okay, you have to accept that if you can't do this at scale, you go, what's the limit? And, for me, for example, I think from 50 tonnes of fruit, we'll produce about 5,000 bottles this year. in the world of drinks, this is like seen as being like, you know, tiny.
But to you, it's a lot. Like,
it's a huge amount. It's a huge amount of
if
work.
You broke that down into the hours, if you broke that down into everything, it's a massive amount of work.
Yeah, 4-month harvest, and I'll be distilling for another 3 months at least. And you go, well, okay, if we draw a limit for us at 10,000 bottles a year, which is still mind-shatteringly small for most people in this industry, but you have to accept that if you're going to pursue something like this, actually sometimes you have to make sure you still enjoy it. And actually, if we want to be touching those things and distilling and
that's the bit you enjoy, isn't it? The bit you enjoy is doing it right, doing it your method.
Exactly
the capitalist method, yeah.
You know, it's lovely meeting people, it's lovely talking to people, it's lovely sharing people, but ultimately I don't want to be a manager, I don't want to be a sales rep, you know, actually I want to do something I love doing. And yes, you know, I occasionally have to come out of the shadows and go into the city, you know, and talk to people. Yeah, and also, but you know, again, you know, with what we produce, it doesn't feel like it has to be a hard sell, you know, and I think that's a lovely thing. You want to maintain that thing where you go and talk to people who care, you know, and actually, you know, it was interesting. I was talking to a new importer the other day, and in South Korea, of all places, you know, and he goes, but, you know, if we start working together, what are your expectations on volume? And you go, my expectations on volume are zero, you know, all I want is these projects with people that care about them. You know, we don't have enough to...
Yeah, if you put 2 bottles in front of the right person, that could dramatically change Capreolus.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also that thing of going, it's fine to work with, you know, 10 people that really care about what you do. Life's too short to, you know, not do that. So, but, you know, it's not necessarily, you know, Diageo, I'm afraid, are not going to come and buy us out for this, you know, but it's much more sensible to build something you're happy to do for 30 years, you know, and actually if someone comes and buys our gin recipe for £10 million, they offer us, you know what, I'm not going to deny my family that financial freedom, and then go and not worry about selling enough bottles of eau de vie to, you know. But the reality is that's unlikely to happen, you know, and I think building a business just to sell, and we saw this lots with people kind of over COVID who were building businesses to sell, and they saw this big dip, you know, and that was suddenly this huge moment of stress for them, you know, and actually, you know, and they saw what they thought they were going to achieve in a year or two being pushed back 3, 4, 5 years. And that was a nightmare. And, you know, we were in that place where every restaurant in the world closed down, and you go, holy moly, what do we do now? And I sent out so many samples, I forgot that people would ever buy things again. And, but you know what? We paid the bills. We were doing something we loved doing. We had enough nice things to drink, about, which is
never
great.
short of that.
Yeah, you know, and that's, you know, again, that's it's a different value point, isn't it? You know, it's a different value point to building that. And I'm not saying that working in that other way is a bad way. We've all got to find things that fulfill us. But I guess for me, it's that thing of trying to go, well, look, if anything happens in the next 30 years and we don't have, you know, but actually in 30 years' time, I still want to be happy doing what I'm doing.
Yeah.
You know, so all of the gubbins around it, you know, all of the, you know, the boring stuff, like chasing those bottles that were 4.5 months late, or, you know, doing this, you know, they're all that compromise that means that you're doing that thing which is
the bit that you really, really love.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There you go. I've put the whole world to rights in a few
Follow
minutes.
this method.
Yeah, don't follow this method. Please don't. Unless it's something you really love doing, you know, and I would rather, I'd like to see more people doing this, but I'd rather not see more people doing it than more people doing a half-assed version of it.
Aye. It's almost that you'd rather see people, and we talk about it a lot, you know, if one of the best things I think people could get for this podcast or from the book, one of the best feedback we could ever receive or hear of is someone that's like, I listen to your podcast, I've read the books, I've gone and set up my own business, I'm 2 years deep and I've never been happier. Like, to us, that would be the fulfilling part, you know, that people have realised that there is an alternative life out there, and it may just be more fulfilling.
Yeah, exactly, you know, and it's, you know, this year, because we're way beyond capacity, you know, I've been doing 60, 70-hour weeks, you know, in fruit season and going home, you know, to the baby. And you go, okay, well, this isn't sustainable, you know, for the long term, you know, and this is why we're kind of looking to take that next step. But you go, also, would I prefer to be sat in an office doing a 40-hour week than doing this? And you're like, Jesus Christ, no way, you know. And I think that's a really good signifier that when you're going, actually, we're properly pushing it this year, and I'm still happy with what I'm doing. You know, you have that moments of frustration where you're like, I can taste that kind of little bit more efficiency or a little bit more kind of, you know, things being easier. But generally, you look at that point and you go, okay, well, this is that end goal. And actually, if we do this for another year or 2 years, you know, and we'll be at that point, that doesn't seem so bad. But, you know, it's stuff you have to learn, you know, as a small producer, you know, that what you're doing is not necessarily.
Sounds like you've learned a lot, though. Like, it sounds like I'm just amazed.
You love it the way like we both love it. But so one of the things that I find quite interesting is like we talk to a lot of makers and we talk about, you know, how goal setting and stuff like that, but nobody's ever had a goal as far ahead in the future as you. How do you guys tackle that? Does it just come part and part with the producing that you're doing? But you know, you're talking about taking on a lifetime lease for a piece of land that's not going to show you anything for 20 years. It's a very uncertain time.
Quince's might be 6 or 7 years, you know, so blink of the eye compared.
Yeah.
But, it's, you know, the model I've worked by is choose by the most romantic idea you can and then, you know, try and make it work. But I'm not necessarily advising that. It's really hard, you know, it's, and I think it's important to remember that, you know, we've been going commercially for about 6 years and the business has transformed beyond where I imagined we would be in that time, you know, and actually what I thought might be the result, you know. So, you know, I have no idea what I'll be thinking in 5 years' time, really, you know, but...
Other than one more year and these quinces will be ready.
Yeah, exactly. Bloody things, why are they not growing here? But, you know, you also have to take that leap of faith, don't you? You know, that you kind of go, well, actually, I'm lucky I do something I love doing. We've hit that point where it's not necessarily... You know, we have a lot of support. So, you know, money is important for these things. But to make that next step, and again, really hard as a small business, you go, well, that big next step, you know, comes with a whole pile of financial kind of worry. And but you also have to go, you know, I guess for us it's that, are you happy doing what you're doing? Are these things that tie in with what you love? Is there a way around this that actually makes you as happy in your own mind as doing it. And, for me, shelling out 40 grand on an industrial unit a year doesn't make sense. We're lucky we're in the Cotswolds, where when we have people that, especially maybe come up from somewhere like London, they come and sit in the garden, drink eau de vie, it's very nice. And actually, again, you think back, what's the value of what you do? And you go, and why do you love doing what you're doing? And is sitting in a metal shed on an industrial site, have you lost that connection with what you're doing? And the thought of kind of trying to gain efficiency only to go and plant a few hundred trees and look after that, and we'll see if it happens. It should, but we'll believe it when it's there. And but it has to be this thing where then you go, well, this maintains that connection for us, and that maintains the things we love about it. And
if you take those aspects away, then what?
Exactly. And you go, will the fruit from those orchards with the maintenance cost us less than working with maybe a more efficient farmer? They might cost us the same amount of money, but I'll have more control, more control, and that's lovely. But also, it's a crazy idea to do something to make yourself more efficient and make things easier to work, and then to take on that. But again, for us, as a producer, it's not only as a resource that you're utilising, but, it's, for me, it's the enjoyment of seeing those things grow, and it's spending time in an environment like that. And then for our clients, they can come up and they can see we have this understanding of the landscape, they have this connection. And, as much as we don't do any marketing whatsoever, this is also a part of that communication and that understanding of that value of what you do. These spirits are totally clear, and yet they can transport you to that place. But to go and drink them in the place where they come from,
it's a different experience.
Exactly. I'm going to open another bottle.
So one of the things we talked about briefly was the sort of people around you that help you make it happen, because you're in quite a fortunate position with your photography background. We've also got, did you say someone very local does all your letterpressing? Like, everything's happening super local, isn't it?
So we were very lucky when we started out that I was a photographer, my brother is a graphic designer, my dad's in marketing and communications, and my partner Hannah, her dad does letterpress printing. Her parents live 2 miles from the distillery, and they, we had no money when we set up. I think I had £8 left in the overdraft when I launched.
Really?
Hannah had paid the last month's rent. It was scary. And we lent on everybody, and it meant that, we could work with that level where we'll go, well, what are your fantasy products? How do you make them? And it's like, well, of course there'll be hand printed labels, and we'll write them all with a dip pen with the right nib and the right ink. And, because we're using letterpress labels, we can't use a machine to apply them. So we'll just build wooden jigs and apply them all by hand, and we'll use UV proof bottles, and all of this stuff, which is kind of respective of that work and the farmers you work with, and those people buying the products. And
I guess that's the first thing they see, though, and it just oozes like quality, doesn't it? You can just see like how much time and effort spent on.
Yeah, it was, for us, it was the biggest showcase. The biggest. How do I describe this? Justification of all those details was there's a 3-star Michelin restaurant in London called Core by Claire Smith, and they put a new display in the middle of their restaurant, and it doesn't have any bottles on it except for it's got all of our bottles on there. And she put up a post, Claire, the kind of chef patron, and she said, well, we just thought these were so beautiful, we wanted them as a centerpiece in the restaurant. And this is a restaurant where it's quite easy to go and spend £600 or £700 on supper. So I haven't actually been there to eat. Yeah, I've
not invited you yet.
Yeah,
So
no, I'm waiting for the free meal. But it's amazing for something which is very basic and again, we're back to simple processes, aren't we? These things are very simple things to do, but they're not something that's easily mass produced, and I think that's a lovely thing.
Yeah, but do you know what I love about that is like we often look at creating our dream product and every single thing, I hope every single thing except this podcast, because the more makers we speak to are saying the same. Everything you read is all telling you, well, you need this much money to put into this to make this perfect, and just go and look for the right people.
Yeah.
Just go and look for the right people. There is always going to be an element of beg, borrowing and stealing to get it right. Ask for help. People will buy into your story. Like, as much as customers buy into your story, I think people buy into the story as well.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, the suppliers will buy into the story. Even with, with our original printer, Pure Print, they were so helpful because they seemed to get our story straight away. And I'm well aware that all the consulting that they gave us to get us started and all the hundreds of blank versions of what was eventually became edition 1 of We Are Makers that we've got around our house, that would have had a cost attached to it.
Of course.
If we hadn't had that conversation with it.
And I think there's that kind of recognition that, we're, in the UK, we're kind of slightly reticent about asking for help or asking. And no, you shouldn't be abusing people or anything like this, but actually you talk to these people about what you're doing, and we're exactly the same. I have a friend, we made friends over the internet in Brazil who's setting up a distillery,
Nice.
We've been giving some advice there and doing amazing work, and another friend who we finally met with a fruit distillery in Croatia. But there's small businesses again where these are people that care about what they do, and if the intention's right and if that degree of focus is right, you want to help people, succeed, and we kind of always work with, so our letterpress printer, we moved to a slightly larger letterpress printer because every time I saw Hannah's dad, Andrew, he looked like I was chasing him. And, it hit that point. And, but they really help you out. And, it's if you're nice to people, people are nice to you back, and we kind of, they've really pushed the bar out to get us stuff ahead of other people when we're like, God, this is desperate. They will put in that extra time. But we also treat them nicely. We pay them straight away. We pay them on time. We
I think that's important.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
one of the big things. The people that work for us have always, like, as soon as the invoice comes in, we pay it.
Yeah.
And the amount of people, like, I never realised that was a thing. But the amount of people that have been like, oh, nobody does that.
Yeah.
Why not?
But you've already done the job.
Exactly.
You've already delivered it. Of course you're going to get paid right now.
Yeah. And then people, it's okay to pay within the terms if your cash flow is not going to meet that.
Yeah, of course.
But if you can do that as well, it's a great way just to
build trust, I think.
Yeah, build trust. And I think this is the, again, it's why we have such close relationships with the fruit farmers we work with, because so James, who's become a good friend, who grows our damsons, and he's growing some very rare plums that we've been taking this year, and it's always this thing that he, this year the weather was really shifting about, and he was ringing up, and it always sounded like he was apologetic, because suddenly that compression in ripeness or that extension and going, well, actually, we were thinking it was going to be this day, but it's going to be 2 days, or, oh my God, we've just looked at the fruit. Can you take 3 tons today? And, and there was always that thing where you would always say, yep, it's fine. don't worry, we'll work it out, it'll be all right. Yeah. But also that thing of going, well, if we all help each other out as small producers, and we all have that little bit of, rather than kind of going, this is such a pain in the ass, and why did you do this? And actually, we're also there to help them. They're there to help us, and it means that, not everything has to be down to the penny, but it means that you value people, and if you show that value to people, and if you show that you're doing something of value. Sorry, this is a very long tangent around to the point. But, when you understand, that people are valued, if you're doing something you value yourself and you talk to people about that, it's very easy for people to help you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
If you throw your kind of toys out the pram, or if you try and blag stuff, is not the right way to do it, but actually kind of build these relationships with people and actually give a little bit of yourself to them. And this is what those printers are doing for you, is they're investing in you.
Absolutely.
And it's a word I use a lot, it's
a good word, investing.
And we invest in even our customers, where you go. So in 2018, I finally became happy with the way I was distilling. This was 10 years in, and we recalled every single bottle in the marketplace and replaced it for free, because which for a small company was absolutely terrifying. But I didn't want there to be a single bottle out there that wasn't at the level that I wanted to be working at. And that's commercially not a clever thing to do. But what it actually showed to people was that we cared about what was out there. And I didn't ask for the bottles back. I said, give these to your staff. I want you to take these home. I want you to enjoy them yourself. But I want everything out there to be at the level that I think we can be at. And because of that, so we're going to, I've just poured you some blackcurrant, but we're going to jump as an illustration. This was for probably one of the world's best wine shops, called Hedonism Wines in, sorry, we should just have a podcast of popping corks.
Really, I think
I was like, that one was so satisfying.
I love it.
But you build up that relationship and trust, and we had apricots aren't typically grown in this country, but they're a mid-season plum, and if you can protect them from those frosts, so these are grown on a very steep south-facing slope, the quality is just breathtaking. And I got some apricots, and this is the first time these were ever distilled in the UK. But we had that fruit in, and because we've built up the relationship with this incredible wine shop, Hedonism Wines, and Ben, the buyer there, such a great supporter, but he also knows the standards we hold ourselves to. And we're working with these apricots, and he kind of emailed me and said, are you doing anything exciting? And I was like, well, we're doing this. And he said, well, look, we're looking for something to celebrate our 10th year anniversary. They can afford anything they want, and I said about the apricots, and Ben said, well, we'll take it. And this was before I'd distilled it, so we didn't know the quality, we didn't know and this was like, it won't be ready for a year, we can't taste it for then. And the reason that he obviously had that confidence was he knows that I'm harder on myself than he is on us, and I wouldn't let them have it if it wasn't right.
Perfect, aye.
You're not going to be like, you're just going to have it anyway.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. You've committed to taking this. So this is 23 kilos of hand-sorted apricots in every litre. We destain them all, apart from about 10%, and then...
Oh, you can smell it.
Yeah.
And that's blackcurrant.
No, sorry, this is apricot.
That's the apricot one. This is the one you were talking about that went to the...
And this went to Hedonism Wines, and this was 115 bottles from a ton of fruit, So
It's punchy.
But it tastes like sunshine. It has a sensation of...
It's strange not to sound like one of those, I've been to one wine tasting and now know what I'm talking about. Because I actually don't, as I have commonly referred to myself as a Luddite. But you can picture the steep slope, sunshine growing. It's there, you know?
And they're very synesthetic spirits, you know, that they really tie to...
Very nice.
It's very nice.
Good. They really tie to our experience, you know, and actually... you know, whilst we're handing drinks around, I'll hand you the blackcurrant because, you know, we're talking about how these evoke experiences, and this for me divides people on whether you've picked these fruits, you know, and so often you're picking them as a child because this is, you know, I think 24 kilos of blackcurrants in a litre. We've gone through them berry by berry. There's not a single leaf in there. And yet when you smell this smells more like the plant than the fruit. And I always describe it that you've pushed your hand through that bush, you're eating those berries, but you're nosing that perfume that's clinging.
Wow.
And this is fascinating, you know, how they reveal so much more.
So I've never picked blackcurrant, so I don't know if I smell the bush more than the berry.
Yeah.
Oh, you can smell
Yeah,
it.
but you obviously have, so.
And it smells incredibly herbaceous. It's very musky and minty and perfumed. And
that's where I'd have put it, minty. Like I would have thought of mint leaf. You know, that's the first thing I thought, like mint leaf. More, strangely, more the texture of a mint leaf than actually the leaf itself.
And isn't that incredible how a clear liquid can be evocative, you know, even in the sensory
certainly
part
evocative of a
nose?
texture.
Yes.
Rather than a taste or a smell.
Yeah. And I think this is something that really, really fascinates me, that sometimes we distill things like pears and you can feel the skin or the graininess on your palate. And, you know, for me, I'm sitting there going, well, is this a synesthetic reaction? Is this, you know, part of that experience being kind of evoked by my brain? Or in fact, is it these essential oils that maybe they have this sensory effect on us? And actually we suddenly go, well, have I just spent, you know, 38 years eating these things thinking this was a physical part of that fruit? Or is it actually something which is having this reaction? And it was interesting, we tried earlier in the warehouse, not the garage, 2 different plums that were bred within half a mile of each other. And, you know, these were 2 very rare cooking plums. And yet they were completely different. One was all honey and flowers and floral notes.
That one was really interesting for me. That one was really, really interesting for me because they were total opposite ends of the scale.
Exactly. And the other one was all cacao and chipotle and very wild and spiced. And you know, this is the amazing thing with doing these things, because you're constantly learning and you're constantly reviewing. We're back, you know, constant cycles to small producers of going, well, you know, me sort of jokingly saying, oh, we're all fruit squashers, but how can you do a simple process and keep learning? You know, how can a winemaker take fruit from that same plot of land, squash it every year for 30 years and produce things which can be quite transcendent, but they can also progress, you know, and every year I work, I think that I'm learning. And, you know, you've worked with leather, and actually you go, well, working with leathers and going, well, how does that vary from the cattle you're working from, or how does that vary on changes in that grain of that
because it changes the product, you know, every bit of leather is different, so every product's different.
How is that flexibility or that elasticity or anything? How do you use that to make something? And
even the difference between, you know, one of the key differences, same leather comes in, one veg tan, one bridal tan. They're 2 single steps that have changed. End product, entirely different.
Yeah.
Entirely different to work from, entirely different finish. one step changed.
Exactly. Yeah. You know, how does exactly that curing of that meat, that enzymatic action, you know, how do you manipulate that? And you know, I kind of talk about these things not to demean them at all. You know, I'm kind of being English and self-effacing, saying, well, we squash fruit and boil it. But, you know, that is the... but this is the fascination for me, where you can look at the most extreme technological way of removing these things. And do they, you know, I'm not saying something's better or worse, but for me, it's amazing how you can work with this idea of artistry and craft and, again, all of these things that have maybe been devalued, you know, in some conversation, but actually when you look at really just working with care, you know, working with care, how you can work in a way which is very simple. And, you know, I grew up watching things like Indiana Jones, you know, and it was this kind of how you can have something which is quite basic, but this sort of discovery and this idea of this wanting to be an alchemist, you know, wanting to turn lead into gold, you know, and all of these things, but how you can squash fruit, you can boil fruit and actually have something that actually captures you and takes you back to a moment. And I remember a lady tasting our raspberry eau de vie and starting to cry, and she said, you know, sorry, this took me back to a summer in 1974 when my family and I stayed on this fruit farm, and the smells and, you know, textures are so evocative. And that's quite amazing for squashed and boiled fruit, you know, and I think that's the fascination, that you can have things which are, you know, so...
all senses.
Exactly, so transcendent, and actually... you know, smell and flavour is one of these things that's really interesting, that actually bypasses the logic part of your brain, you know, and it's this real kind of key into this very artistic or very emotional part of you, you know. And we produced a blackberry eau de vie for Le Manoir to use in their kitchens, and I was writing my nosing notes for that, and the first thing I wrote was autumnal warmth, and I kind of pulled myself up and said, what do you mean autumnal warmth? How can a smell remind you of that sun in September? And you go, but this is because these things are so tied in that connection in your brain and your experience back to picking that fruit in this area, you know. And I think that's a really interesting thing, where these things become more than the sum of their parts, you know, and they can become a real connection to experience and emotion. And, you know, we've had this so many times where someone smells this and goes, oh, you know, this really reminds me of, you know, sitting in this orchard with my girlfriend, and we could really smell all this ripe fruit around us, you know, but it smells not like the fruit, it smells actually like the orchard.
Must be nice for you to get this feedback, you know, just to like, this is what my product, you know, has an effect on people, you know.
So basically, you're distilling eau de vie, claiming to the world that you're making a drink, and actually you're making a time machine. So it's taking people wherever they want, when they want in time.
Something like that. Yeah, it's you know, it's hard, isn't it? Because you kind of it sounds very grandiose talking about these things, but it's the same reasons why I love the products, you know, that, so, you know, our apple eau de vie we tried earlier, I have this cheap trick of going and if we take people to that orchard, getting them to smell the hedgerows, because the hedgerows smell like the eau de vie. And you go, but these plants are growing in that same moist climate, they're growing in that same environment. And I think for me, that's this fascinating thing where, you know, we've been really, really lucky to be in an area where we can work in a super local way. But it makes it even more special for me when it captures, yes, and again, I'm going to sound incredibly pretentious, but, you know, when you've lived through that same year's worth of weather, you have that greater understanding of why things are performing in a way. And it's capturing that reflection of that moment. And I think that's the magic, you know, that, you know, okay, so another way I describe it is that I don't have the intelligence to write a symphony, but actually what we have in these fruits is an absolute symphony beyond the complexity of what almost anyone could construct or come up with. And these, you know, I have as much of an ego as anyone else, but these are products where you need to, for me, for the way I want them to be, you need to pull your ego back in slightly, and you accept that you are completely deficient, you know, compared to what you're actually working with. And that symphony that's there, your job is just to record that. You know, and coming from a photography background where you have that gubbins in the back of your head, you know, all the technical knowledge, but you have to just place yourself in that situation and have that experience, have that technical knowledge to turn the dial the right way, press the button at the right moment, you know, and do that. And this is sort of, you know, it's a simplification of 12 years worth of learning. But it's but you have to accept that that's the magic of it, you know, for me, is that you can capture something which is so evocative of where we are and what grows here, and very simple processes, you know, possibly a very simple person making them, but, you know, it's also that, you know, it's the excitement. So yeah, sharing them with people is a really lovely thing, because it's always interesting to see people's other reactions. You know, it's a very personal way of working.
For me, it shows me that we're doing something that, you know, people enjoy and, you know, want.
Yeah. And I think that's the amazing thing, isn't it? That not only can you do something for yourself that you care about and that you enjoy, but you go and put it out there, and
other people just love it as much as you do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that's becoming more and more important, but also more and more impressive to be able to do that, because we can all get 10 Amazon parcels through the door. Not a bash at Amazon, it's got its place, but we can all get 10 Amazon parcels through the door daily. Like, we can all get stuff.
You're right.
Pardon me, yeah. We can all get stuff as and when we want or need it. Like, finance aside, obviously. But to get something that actually makes you react in the way some of these products and makers' products that we speak to does it's really seldom. Like, it just doesn't seem to exist much anymore. Yeah. So one of the key questions I sort of had there is, in questions kind of developed as you were talking there. Do you think you're in love with the process or the outcome of the product more?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So I always feel worried when I see people that love drinking beer and they say, you know what would be really cool would be to have a small distillery. And then they realise, you know, that the reality of making beer is 95% cleaning, you know, 4% lifting very heavy things, you know, and if you're lucky, 1% drinking beer. Yeah. I really love the process, you know, and coming from this background of working with fruits, you know, for myself, making ciders and distilling for myself, and that alchemy was something that really fascinated me. But it also gave you that understanding of there's a physicality to it. There's, you know, there is a discipline to it. And I think actually as makers, discipline is a big word, you know, like the...
you need to have it.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a rarity. More than anything else, discipline is a rarity. Innovation is the word that scares me, because I kind of think, if you're an innovative producer, does that mean you have to constantly reinvent yourself? You know, actually for me, someone doing something for 30 years and improving for 30 years is maybe more exciting. I've talked about how long it took me to be happy, and I feel I'm still progressing every year since that point. But yeah, no, for me it was the absolute process where you get to work with these amazing things, and what you produce is something magical, and it's not about drinking alcohol. For me it's capturing this moment, and I think that whole progression of process is just something that's quite magical to me.
It is magical.
Yeah, and isn't that amazing to do that? And it's odd to have a job doing magic.
Yeah. And do you think, so you were obviously a photographer before and conservation journalist and stuff before, but you talked a lot about botany, and even in your early childhood, and do you think if it wasn't for the drink that you're making, do you think you'd have always ended up moving into something botany, or is it the drink side that attracted you? What is it that attracted you to that?
So I originally started studying kind of my 5 AS levels, all in science, and I wanted to go into biology. I've really had a love for natural history. And I realised I didn't want to spend my life in a lab, and actually going and doing photography, again, wasn't necessarily about doing photography, but it was a way that I could spend more time in the field, and I was very lucky to do that, and again, we're back to communicating value. Work with scientists who are some of the most brilliant people and worst communicators in the world, and how do you distill 20 years worth of work down to something that actually communicates for them and helps them get funding and helps people understanding the value of what they do. But, it was that thing, when I kind of thought, what do I do with myself, when I fell out of love with the photography. And it wasn't the photography I fell out of love with, but it was selling photography and actually doing 3-year-long stories and working with magazines that said, well, this is amazing and this hasn't been told before, but if we do another issue, our 3rd issue, with a meerkat story in it this year, we'll make more money for our sponsors. And that can be a really hard thing as a, and coming back to this thing where I've completely forgotten the question, but you're going to have the tangent anyway. Coming back to the drinks, and it was something I loved doing, but again, it was a different world to sell into, where, suddenly I found myself from selling stories about conservation to going, well, we sell things that are delicious, that have alcohol in, and people go, I like delicious things and I like alcohol. And yes, we're not selling into the alcopops world. We're not selling into a world where we feel that, we're doing great harm to society. This is not 14-year-old kids downing litres of this. This is very small amounts of very precious stuff being consumed. And
with a great story.
But yeah, it's that's a lovely kind of way of working. There is a point to this kind of diatribe, but I've just finished 4 months of processing fruit. You're not getting anything to hear it out of this.
We'll go with an easier question then. So one of the questions that has been battering about my head since we went into to see the stills there. So we've got one, it's a very clear dome head, sort of flattened dome head, and then you've got the one that's the sort of teardrop.
Yeah.
What's the key difference and why? What is the difference between your 2 stills in there? What jobs are they doing to make
Absolutely. So one of them is dedicated just to gym production, which is the one with the teardrop shaped helmet.
Right.
That was our original still. It was open flame gas powered, which around 80% alcohol is exciting. We're now 100% renewably sourced electricity. But the other still has this rounded helmet, and this is what we use for the fruit distilling.
Right.
And what happens in that distillation is there's an evaporation of alcohol and aroma and flavour coming across. And as you boil alcohol out, the concentration of water is becoming higher and higher. The boiling point is going higher and higher. And it means you can stand there for 7 hours and slowly taste through the entire spectrum of one fruit. So you're tasting the pips or the skins or that little bit of a lemon aroma in there. You know, and you're pulling it out as this very, very fine thread, which, you know, is reassembled to become a whole. But that transition, distilling is basically around heating and cooling. So we're adding heat to have that steam evaporate. Mm-hmm. But inside those helmets, the heavier flavours at that point are cooling and running back down into the still. So we have this really fine transition. And on that fruit still, underneath that helmet, is a water bath. So the gin still is completely passive. It just relies on air temperature. So we have this fixed cooling. On the fruit still, where we're even more precise, and it's incredibly, incredibly difficult, we have tubes running up through this water bath, and we can control that within 1/4 of a degree. And that means we can hold elements back, we can let things... But if we try and manipulate too much, again, we rob it of complexity and we rob it of texture. So it's a very fine kind of thing where you're playing this game where you're going, we're just applying enough heat to allow this thin thread to come out, but we're also controlling this condensation in there. And this condensation is actually meaning that we're not rushing everything over. Again, simple process. It's just boiling liquid and letting it come over in a fine enough stream. And it means that with this incredible care, and we're only keeping, 40-45% of the alcohol. Most people are recycling the bad parts and keeping over 90%. But in this tiny window, you have something which is free of these very alcoholic, volatile heads, which is the first thing that comes off, these very fatty tails that are at the end. And these act as kind of masking agents to flavour. Right. But this heart in that distillation is suddenly so detailed and so delicate and so fine. And, for white spirits that most people are used to drinking, these start equating sometimes more closely to wine than they do to spirits, because we're not used to, we're used to looking at things like big Islay whiskies, and this big hammer blow of flavour. And yes, they're very complex, but they're also quite easy to understand if you can't find that complexity sometimes, because they just kick you around the mouth, and I realised long ago that I would never make things which would be seen as masculine, and actually that's the excitement. So beautifully long tangent yet again, but actually this cooling, that device of these stills, and to be honest, helmet shape doesn't matter too much. What you're looking at is actually controlling its interaction. And yes, it reduces pressure a bit as it kind of expands out, which slows that spirit down a little bit. But yeah, very simple. And, I'll let everybody that's listening into the secret of how they can go and try distilling really quickly and easy. Go and turn the kettle on and hold a spoon over the top, and those drops of water you've got on that spoon will be absolutely pure, and you've just distilled water. It's a very simple thing. These, I have this bad thing of going to distilleries and not looking at the stills, and I'm there looking at the floor drains and the infrastructure, and you're like, well, these big pots are just glorified kettles, so... But again, it's part of the magic, I guess. Oh
yeah, absolutely,
there
it's magic.
Didn't know that.
There we go.
So
you like it?
I like to know something. I like to come away with something that I can drop in a chat later and sound intelligent. That's my goal for every podcast. If I can drop something in a chat later on and sound intelligent, I've won.
Exactly. So. I'm still searching for that moment.
Not at all. So the gin distilling, though, you say you've got a still for gin. That's something we've not talked about at all. We've talked purely about your eau de vie.
Absolutely.
Do you want to talk a bit more about that?
Yeah, of course. So we started out, and I never thought anyone would buy English eau de vie in the world. It's something we don't have a history of. It's something we don't have an understanding of. Still, 95% of people in this country have probably never heard of it.
I had never heard of it.
Exactly. And, and we don't get to experience it. And, when I was starting the distillery, I thought, wow, we'll start the distillery. And this is before gin went absolutely crazy. And we started seeing things like candy cane flavoured gin and all of this kind of nonsense. I thought, well, you know what? We'll create a gin that has that same balance and complexity I love in eau de vie. I'm not having a distillery and not making eau de vie, so I'll produce a few hundred bottles for myself and a few people every year. And I was very wrong about that. That's now what we're known for. But the gin was a lovely exercise because suddenly you're going from this very singular thing where you're trying to capture something very unique and very singular, despite all of its complexity. And suddenly I had a canvas to draw on. We were looking at it. So the sensible way, the most way people would make a product like this is you go and look on the internet, you find a gin recipe, and it's quite easy to do, and you modify it. And you go, okay, we've got nothing wrong with this. You've got a really good base recipe. You tweak it a little bit so it's yours, and that makes sense. Any other way is stupid, which is the way I took. And and I thought, well, I've got enough of an ego that I was like, no, I want to build this from the ground up. I want it to be exactly how I want it to be. And I ended up splitting it into 6 different flavour groups and going, well, suddenly going from these singular things, I can actually build my own, again, very personal, idealised botanicals by working with all these plants where they share similar chemical components, and yet we can start building and structuring and stretching them, and again, it's a bit like painting a kind of olfactory painting, if you want, that sounds very too grandiose, but I'm lucky to have a fairly reasonable botany background, so I shortlisted the plants I thought would work really well in those flavour groups, and I got it down to just 75. And then we test distill them all separately through macerating them in alcohol, and then again by suspending them above, so vapour extraction. And we have this vast library, and I sat next to Hannah every night with a saucepan between us that I was spitting into, tasting these things, writing notes, and slowly refining the selection and drawing them in together. And we ended up with 34 botanicals in this recipe, and I wouldn't let anyone else try it because I didn't want to have this kind of group consensus that I felt would actually drive people back to what they understood to be that flavour thing. We'd also had 400 kilos of organic blood oranges from a little cooperative in Sicily turn up on the drive, and 50 kilos of lemons.
Really?
Because I knew I wanted to work with fresh citrus, and we spent 4 days zesting them and vacuum packing them and filling a chest freezer. And I thought, and this is before we had licensing, and I was like, oh my God, if we don't get licensing, we're making marmalade forever. And luckily we did, and we're now doing up to 2.6 tons every year. So, we made this thing where, yes, it has, for example, this blood orange in it, and yet we were extending that with sweet and sourness from rowan berries. We were adding woody berryness from wild rose hips. We're adding herbaceous berry from blackcurrant leaf and voluminous berry from hibiscus. Loads of sweetness from that with no acidity, and stretching the high end of juniper with peppermint, because to me that high end of juniper always tastes like peppermint. And it's an amazing thing where you start going from this very a way where you almost have no control beyond that ripeness of that plant to capture, to something where you can start manipulating and shaping it, and this is that thing where it's a very exciting thing to do. And, I gave myself that freedom to work with ingredients from all over the world, those spices, and you ended up with something that was very unique. And we were really lucky, we launched, I had zero money. And, 5 months later, the Whiskey Exchange, which is one of the 2 really big online retailers in the UK, their head buyer was a master of wine, Dawn, who is my industry angel, and you find these people, they're amazing. Yeah. And she's a master of wine. There's only about 400 of them in the world, and they are these terrifying, these scary people who can name stuff down to individual vintages and vineyards, and they're very amazing people. And exactly. And she kind of recognized what we were trying to achieve. And again, she really put herself out, and she named our gin as their spirit of the year. And suddenly, 5 months into it, and suddenly 7 months into it, I found I was exporting to 5 countries as the one employee. And
like, how do you even do that?
Well,
where do you start?
A very quick learning curve.
I can imagine it was.
And Dawn was amazing because we pay quite happily. We have an NHS. We live in a nice country, but we pay a lot of tax, and we have to pay it as it goes out the door. And they put in a huge order, and we were suddenly faced with a £15,000 tax bill, and we had no money in the bank to pay it. Yeah, and I had to say to Dawn, I was like, look, is there any way you can pay us in advance? Or pay us enough money to pay this?
But she had tasted this by now.
She had tasted it. She had said we were going to be their spirit of the year. They wanted to put in this huge order, and yes, it's a well-funded company, but she was the one who actually was like, no, what you're doing is worth investing in again. And we're coming back to people investing, and she paid us in full,
really?
Before we delivered the product, and you kind of go, well,
Thank you, but also like a bit like, oh, I hope she really likes it.
But God,
amazing.
It's so cool, and actually, we're back to this small business thing, aren't we? Of you're starting out, and God,
you're small, but you're still
cash
getting
flow and
but you're still getting connections like that, which is quite spectacular.
Which I think that really shows the value in your product, the way you're doing things, doesn't it? If people like that if people of that higher caliber are buying into what you're doing.
And they just, we're back to this thing again, aren't we? Of, it's people care about you if you care about what you do. Good people do. Mm-hmm. Not everyone has time for this. Not everyone sees the value in it. But, I had this conversation with Dawn when I visited her once, and we were talking about packaging, and she was saying, she was being kind of kind about what we were doing, and but I was like, I lost a month's worth of sleep over deciding on the corks. I don't understand why people are doing stuff like X, and X. And she kind of said, but you realise most people don't care about these details, and you forget this when you move like in a kind of craft world.
It's so true. You're like, no one really, like, they open it and they're like, okay, but they don't actually think that you've actually spent so much time thinking about this one little bit of the product.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a total irrelevance to most people. And it's, funny story is we send out samples to kind of professionals, so, they get a nice little set of little bottles. Mm-hmm. They're all handwritten. They're all beautifully, all nicely wrapped. Piece of paper, which is a scrap off our label paper, which we've embossed to stick the tissue paper together, because I'm like, why are we wasting this? And I suddenly had this point where I changed the letter paper we were sending stuff out to the same stock as our label paper. And this is kind of super anally retentive. And then I kind of sent it out, you know, the letters to these people written on this paper. And suddenly those photos that were popping up on Instagram of people receiving these sets had the letters in them, you know, and they never had before. And it was that funny thing where you go like, it was another nice moment for me because you go, I bet none of those people that have taken those photos know what, you know, like actually have spotted that is on the same label stock, you know, as the samples, you know, that's going out there. But you've suddenly enhanced that values that little bit higher, and it is, you know, details are important, you know.
They absolutely are important.
And it's not this thing where it's necessarily something that people have to notice or people have to care about, but, you know, I guess it's this.
You do. That's important. That's important.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's yours. You know, it's Capreolus is yours. So if you care about it, then care about it.
Yeah.
It's 100% yours.
If you want to go and spend 50 or 60p on a sheet of paper where you could just use office paper, it's your funeral. But it's also, but, you know, I think this is the exciting thing that, you know, as creative people, again, awful term because we're all creative, you know, but as people doing ideas like this, it's amazing to do things in a way that you would like them to be done. And, you know, we accept that, you know, and there will always be, I'm trying to think of what our compromises are, not many. But I was going to say, you know, it's hard to be really the price. Yeah, well, we should probably charge 3 times as much, you know, but actually we do something we really like doing. And but it's
price is a whole different ball game when it comes to
that's a hard one.
That's
a hard one because you want, like, naturally, if you've spent so much time making something, you want it to be in people's hands. You're like Kate and I, well, I say Kate and I, rephrase, Kate put so much time into the magazine and getting it all right. And we're well aware on certain bookshelves it'd be worth way more. But if we sell it at that, it won't be in as many people's hands. And the whole purpose is to get it into people's hands, to discover people like yourself and people like all the bakers. So there's always that. There's so many different aspects to pricing.
I think there's 2 things, you know, when we started, we priced these products at the price I could imagine myself paying for them, you know, with a little bit of profit in. And then I went back a couple of years later and I looked at it again and I said, what happens if I actually pay myself for my time of making these? Not just a little bit of profit that helps grow the business and helps us buy a bit more fruit the next year and helps us with that. Actually just pay, you know, I'm not talking a lot of money, you know, like paying myself a living wage, you know, to actually do this. And you went, oh my God, we're losing money. You know, we're actually doing this. And we ended up having to kind of double the price of many of these things. And something that anyone who's doing anything artistic, very few people value themselves properly. And, you know, you imagine what you could pay. And we did this and we told the people we sold to, I told them why, you know, and none of them blinked. None of their customers blinked, you know, and sometimes that's the hard thing with doing something where you're doing something small as a small business and you're starting out. So last week I was in London at a stunning kind of private members club. You know, it's funded by a big French winery. And Jan, who's a really good friend, an amazing sommelier, amazingly grounded, but he was also looking at our products going, well, you still need to increase the price of these, you know, like you should double them. I'll still buy them. But, you know, we're also in this world where I'm going, well, prices are increasing. We're going to have to increase some stuff. are we going to double our bottles and lose a lot of custom that's not in that super, super rarefied world?
Yeah.
Well, maybe we can't do that, but maybe this is sort of, but you must understand the value of what you're doing. And, it's, back to that thing of going...
Remember, there's you. Remember, you need to pay for you.
Yeah. How many years have you been doing this thing to get to this point?
Mm-hmm.
Where's that experience come from? So, I guess for me, yes, I've been distilling for 12 years, so that you're paying for 12 years worth of experience, and, profit margins are not high on these. But also, I'm taking all the photos, I'm doing a lot of the design work, because it's easier than getting my brother to actually get round to it. And you have to, that has to be factored in, and it's not being greedy, it's actually making what you do sustainable for a career.
Yep.
These things become...
It's not really a side hustle or a hobby, it's your career, it's what you do for your living.
Yeah, exactly. And if you're spending more than a 40-hour week doing it and you're not getting paid for that, then... and yes, I probably get paid less than a lot of my friends doing jobs that maybe they don't enjoy, but it's also this investment for that future, and building something where it's something which is, we're back to value points, and you go, actually the value of going, well, this is my own business and this will pay us enough to have a reasonable lifestyle, and, and
it'll be a lifestyle on your terms as well.
Exactly that.
Which I think is invaluable at the end of the day. You can't put a price on that. It's on your terms, you're doing what you want to do.
Exactly. And it's funny, isn't it? We're talking about going and buying, 3 or 4 acres, for our business, for us to enjoy. And you go, well, actually, can you imagine buying a house with that much land? And, it would be far beyond our reaches. And it's another thing where we get to enjoy that relationship with that space, or enjoy that relationship with where we are. So, it's not for everybody because it's a really, really challenging way. Mm-hmm. But, if you are going to go down that route, you definitely have to understand that you have to eat. You definitely have to pay the mortgage or pay rent, and you definitely have to, there's nothing more miserable than being destroyed by something you love. And I think that's...
that's a one-way, what you say there, that is a one-way ticket to doing that if you don't pay yourself properly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because you'll just end up resenting what you do.
Yeah.
And I think that for me in the homemaker space and craft and artisan space is probably the biggest crime. Mm-hmm. Is people that then fall out of love, like really talented people that fall out of love with it because they just weren't paying themselves enough.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's not uncommon either. It's really not uncommon.
Mm-hmm.
It happens more and more and more. And you see it, you see posts on social media all the time about people that are just, I can't continue to do this any longer. And it's just...
It's a hard one, but you just need to keep going.
Yeah, absolutely.
Trust in your ability.
And also, and just value yourself.
Yeah.
I think that's the, it's kind of, it's okay to have doubts, and actually, I've done a lot of showing off, kind of talking about where these products are, but I still always am nervous showing them to people. I'm still always nervous about, was everything else we did up to that point a fluke? Have I changed something where it's that? Or, that kind of thing of, and actually it's good to be your own critic, but it's also good to, understand your worth in that. And
you need to also pat yourself on the back. Like, you can be your own critic as long as you want, but you also need to remember that even the worst critics will turn around and say a restaurant's good every so often.
Yeah, exactly. And, but I guess then kind of we're back to this thing where we had this brief conversation before starting, and I said, I always remember this conversation I had with somebody And they wanted to start doing letterpress printed books of out of print editions, but they were like, but we want to make them so everybody can afford them. And I kind of said that this is really admirable, this is really admirable. This is really an amazing idea. But you also have to remember that actually kind of you have to be able to afford to work in this way. So sometimes these things aren't affordable to everybody, and there's a reason for that, because they take a huge amount of work and effort and expensive materials and time, and
also there'll be a lot of people that aren't interested in that.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
And the people that are interested in that will pay the worth.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, find your tribe, find the folk that are into what you do.
Yeah.
And they'll pay it. Don't worry about appeasing everybody.
Because you just won't.
Yeah. And people, we tell people what we do, and people sometimes say, are they expensive? And I say, yes, but they're incredible value. Is always my line, because we explain what we do, and this year we have hand sorted 3 million raspberries, 16 tons, berry by berry, walking our fingers through 5 kilo trays. And you look at the amount of effort, and then we're squeezing 12.5 kilos of that into a bottle.
Yeah.
And you go, well, the retail on this is £125. And these, for the eau de vie, they vary between £60 and £125. And you go, but that's 70 pennets worth of raspberries in there. There's 5 pennets in your glass. You go to the supermarket and buy that cheaper. Let alone all the other processes, let alone all the other things. And you have something which is so transcendent. But our role, as producers then is to communicate that value. And you also can't resent people for not understanding what you do if you don't actually So I'm constantly trying to think of ways where if your listeners go and look on Instagram, there's a photo of me with this enormous basket of raspberries, and that is one bottle's worth of fruit, and that just for people just to have that twig,
like, wow, okay,
and you kind of go, holy moly, that is an insane amount of work. And you suddenly go and look at that price and you're like, well, God, that's good value.
It is very good value.
And I think that's, an interesting thing, and does it mean it's affordable for everybody? No, it definitely doesn't.
But it's something that you bring out when you've got, it's a special
it's not something that you have in front of the TV every night, is it? It's like at the end of Christmas dinner or at the end of like a birthday meal, or you appreciate
it. You sit down, you appreciate it. You don't just bring it out just to,
It's not 10 of 10 inch. Do you know what I mean? You don't just crack one open.
No, exactly. And it's also that thing even where you go to Austria or Germany, and the standard measure is 20 millilitres. And actually because these things are
That's less than ours, though, isn't it?
Yeah, 25 mils. And actually, if you're being generous, you probably have a double, of a whiskey.
Yeah.
But these things are so like perfume that you're taking them in almost drop by drop, you can.
Yeah.
And they don't need that. But again, it's that's not our drinking culture. That's not. So how do we communicate this? How do we work with the kind of person who's that intermediary for us, which is a sommelier or bartender? We had 10 bartenders up here yesterday. And you suddenly go, well, how does this work for you on an economic basis? And you go, well, these are so concentrated that you put 2 millilitres in a drink and it totally transforms it, And there you go. Where at the other end of the scale, we go, well, we're talking to a sommelier in a 3-star Michelin restaurant. And if they want to sell it as, we've seen people selling 50ml measures, which I think is far too much because they're so concentrated for £75 for a glass, like in London. And you go, well, this is...
I can't imagine you'd finish that and enjoy finishing it.
No, because they're so
rich. They're so I don't mean rich as in like rich chocolate or anything, but they're so rich and they're so flavoursome and there's so much to it.
Yeah, and you know, and again, you're sort of understanding that markets for us as a producer, which I knew nothing about. And you go, well, this is acceptable at one end, but these people also have to do that. And then going, but actually, how do we find these products in front of people? And people are scared of clear spirits in this country because we don't have that culture, even though these are quite delicate. And we've gone, well, okay, if we work with the sommeliers on a tasting menu, when you go, well, you have 3 petit four, you know, these little sweets at the end of a meal, and you have 5 milliliters of 3 different eau de vie, so they're just taking this drop of pure essence. And, you know, it's finding ways that your product can be out there sometimes where, you know, for us, we've almost had to create a market because, again, you're going, actually...
You're having to prove to people this is actually done here,
yeah,
right here, and I find I find that hard.
Exactly, yeah, and that kind of how do you communicate why something has earned its place to be there, you know, sometimes, and it's great for us, you know, this thing always as a producer, it's such a pain in the ass, like having people come and visit you sometimes because you don't have not you, obviously.
Thank you. Yeah. Good save.
And that's the end. No, no, but you know, when you don't have enough hours in the day and you're working really hard.
Well, if someone's coming to visit you and you get that call of these are right, these need to come now.
Yes.
Like either you're getting the fruit to do what you want to do, or that's a choice.
Yeah, and we also say to people, this may happen. We may not be able to have you, or this may happen. You will be sorting fruit whilst we talk. You know, when you come, which is great because again they have this connection to that experience. And we've had people come up and they've helped us sort 3 or 4 tons of raspberries. You know, like
you should sell the experience.
Well, exactly. Yeah. And you know, for them, it's this huge. You know, what an incredible experience. Well, you do it for 120 days and it's a different thing because it's back to that discipline of going, I'm tired, I'm coming in.
But I have to go and do it.
Yeah, absolutely. But
that's where the passion shines through. That's where the real, and it's across the board for all makers. Like those hard tasks is really what separates the real people that love doing it.
And the value of having those people up to see you is, you know, again, people don't have context and they see your products in a multi-million-pound setting, for example, and what they see is that very polished, beautiful end result of it. And what they don't see is the reality of it and the reality of how small a 7.5 square metre distillery is and how a 0.2 acre garden, you know, and actually this thing where you empower them to become ambassadors. They become invested in you by coming and seeing you. And that is such a valuable thing as makers share. You know, you're sharing with people constantly.
Yeah.
And, you know, one of the biggest kind of hurdles is that with all these things, it's very rare to be producing enough that you can swamp the market with lots of samples, send them off to your Instagram. And, well, you know, our sommeliers, you know, in our very niche world, you have your Instagram influencers, but also it's not something that taking out an advert in the Radio Times is going to help you necessarily, you know, but it's, so again, we're kind of looking at where do you invest yourself and invest your time, and you know, and a lot of that investment is kind of sharing with like-minded people, and that's a great thing to be doing because.
And is it a lot of B2B stuff you're doing rather than B to customer direct sale? It's mostly B2B. I know we talked a lot about restaurants and working with sommeliers and stuff. Is that tends to be your main sales vehicle? Typically,
so we work with a couple of really good distributors as well who have their feet in the doors of all those places.
It's easier.
Yeah, and we don't have to worry about sending out 1 or 2 bottles, and
they just deal with that for you. And
exactly, and but we sell off our website, and you know, and some goes to customers. But again, for us, it's certainly in the UK market, it's 95% to restaurants and bars, you know. So.
And is there other countries that buying something like an eau de vie to sit in the house is a lot more popular than the UK? It's
absolutely. Right. So places like Germany we sell to where they have that understanding and that history of it.
And that would be more a personal customer buying it to sit on the shelf kind of thing.
Yes, but again, what I think all small producers are probably finding is that they're very niche worlds.
Yeah.
So actually, if someone gets to know your stuff in one country, it's easier to make that transition. And we've, you know, again, hospitality is a wonderful thing where it's incredibly multicultural. And London is a great place for it. Sorry, you know, I talk about London and it's not to discount the rest of the UK, and we supply some amazing restaurants over the UK, but it has the highest concentration by a very, very long way of the restaurants that we kind of sell to, you know, probably 80%. And London is still a proving ground worldwide for hospitality. So lots of people come and learn their trade there. So that's really great for us.
Right.
So that, you know, so we have German sommeliers working in the UK, going back to Germany to work, and then taking our products with them. But
it's almost like a giant trade show.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, you know, it's this thing where it's a lovely thing because people are just talking about stuff they're excited about. And
what was we did a magazine street couple, was it last month already?
I've absolutely no idea.
And we met a magazine called Cocktail
Lovers.
Oh,
yeah, yes. Cocktail Lovers.
So we met the lady who runs Cocktail Lovers.
Sandra and
her husband.
Yes.
And we had a really good conversation, and they were talking about
exactly yourself,
And it was just amazing, like a whole magazine of just cocktails and just recipes, and I was just like, oh, that's amazing.
It was just our thing, wasn't it? They just loved it.
And it's funny, isn't it, that you kind of, you know, this is the lovely thing, is that we feel that we're all alone doing these things sometimes, and there's a massive community, and you kind of, it can feel that this very, you know, there's a lot of intensity with a lot of producers, and you can almost feel that you're doing this thing and like no one's ever going to understand it, or no one's ever going to appreciate it, and you definitely hit kind of bumps in the road and all of this thing, and you know, I mean, talk about your failures. I remember when we just started, we went to Le Manoir, which, you know, I've talked about before, and I actually met Raymond Blanc, and he tried our eau de vies, and he said, it's really good what you're trying to do, but these aren't good enough. And, you know, and this was me a few months into sales, and I almost gave up at that point. And he said, you know, it's great what you're doing, but there's no point us listing them if the quality's not good enough. And these, you know, they can buy any quality they want. So it's not to say that they were the worst things in the world, but
I can imagine you just feel like, oh, what I'm doing is just not good enough because that one person said it wasn't.
Exactly.
That's only one person.
And it was, and you know, but sometimes you use that intensity to do it, and I almost gave up, and then I was too bloody minded, and and it really, really helped me, and he was very kind with it, you know, and I was so, you know, I'm so grateful for that kind of constructive criticism, because it made me go away and really, really focus and really work with, you know, even more detail and even more intensity. And suddenly that got me to a point where kind of the weight lifted, and, you know, and we kind of find ourselves like 5 years after that point, making Le Manoir's first exclusive ever eau de vie, working with their bar team, sommelier team and kitchen team. And you can never imagine that kind of step, you know, and I was talking to some producers from Croatia who set up a small distillery, and, you know, again, you're doing this awful kind of thing of talking, and they've seen where the products are, which is great and, you know, amazing. but people have no context to where you've come from. And I said, you've got to remember that 5 years ago, I was on my knees by the house and I was pushing plums through a soil sieve to sieve the stones out. And, you know, like, it's really easy to kind of look at everybody else around you when you're struggling and go, this is never going to work, you know. And
how'd you stop that getting in?
It's hard, you know, it's really difficult. And I think it's finding the right people to talk to, you know, it's sharing that. Don't be scared to share, don't be scared to learn, you know. I'm afraid that nobody doing anything is actually doing anything original. You know, we're all building on the shoulders of everybody and every person that's gone before us. You know, remember that actually in 8 billion people, what you do isn't that important. You know, actually take a moment to breathe, you know, kind of.
Yeah, breathe, take a step back and just be like, look what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Look at what I'm doing.
Absolutely. And, you know, I had this with photography where I used to feel guilty if I wasn't out at 4 a.m. on a Sunday. And my dad had a brain hemorrhage about 10 years ago after a skiing accident. And I found him locked up on the sofa, and it looked like we were going to have to teach him to speak again. He had a big operation, was paralysed for a while. And a week later, he walked out of hospital because he was so bloody fit, you know. Yeah. And I finished this week and I was like, wow. You know, this is... And, you know, it also made me realise that you have to take these things with a kind of measure, you know. And Hannah, my partner, who I'd known for 7 years, and we were both too shy to ask each other out. She was out in Slovakia teaching at the time, you know, so I went and got on a plane and I went and saw her, and, you know, and we finally got together. Because you're like, it's really fine to be very intensely focused on these things, but actually it's not the only thing. Yeah. You have to take this balance and take this enjoyment. And it's not to say that we get the balance right all the time. Definitely not, you know. And, you know, we definitely break ourselves, you know, in fruit season sometimes. But I guess, you know, it's really hard. You've got to hold on to the value that what you're doing is something you enjoy. And I guess that's the thing that's worth pursuing, you know, even if you can't value yourself as much as you should do. Because I think that's the hardest thing to do at all. And then I guess it's just that steps, isn't it, of, you know, reaching out to those people who might be involved in that world. We've already been over this thing of going, if people see that you want to do something worthwhile. But
yeah, I'm more than happy to share anything that we've come across, because I feel I'm still looking for information. Yeah. And I'm like, I don't even know where to find it, but you're almost too scared to ask someone in case they think that, oh, you're going to take their idea or whatever. And it's just like, no, I'm just looking for some advice.
Exactly. And
sometimes I'm just having a shit day.
Yeah.
And I just want to chat to someone. Sometimes it's as innocent, as simple as that. Like, we try and be very, you know, anytime people reach out to us, quite a few books, magazines, publications have reached out to us in different areas, in different fields, not so much in this field. And yeah, here's all our contacts, here's intro emails to all our printers, here's, crack on, do your thing. Yeah. There's space in the world for all of us.
Yeah, and you know, there's some great, amazing brewery in the UK called the Crossover Blendery, and these two guys, you know, were setting it up that approached me, Charlie and George, and I talked to them, and you know, I was really impressed, you know, with what they wanted to do, and they really cared about it. And they're doing these sour beers, long aging, aged on fruit. And they were sort of like, well, you know, we're looking for things. And we hooked them up with almost all of our fruit growers because, you know, and it was funny, Charlie was so kind of grateful. And I was like, well, you're providing a reason for those things to be there. You know, us doing a little introduction is not
so
such a
good.
big thing. But it means that actually
it means the world to them, really. Doesn't it?
and
even in that singular circumstance, like that might then allow that fruit grower to expand how much he grows, which is only going to benefit you and benefit them, which is only going to benefit the whole sort of homegrown alcohol community that you're part of, which will benefit the whole maker community. But
exactly.
It just all ripples out.
A lot of this stuff is incredibly, there's a selfish element to it as well, that you're going, well, more people are paying more money to this farmer. That means they're farming in a sensible way. Mm-hmm. This means they're preserving that, and they're also providing continuity for us. And, but it means that you also have that maintained relationship, with people where, and then, those guys are then talking about us to other people and about what we do with the fruit. Yes. And I'm now talking on a podcast about them about it because you want to support each other, but, it's also, there's nothing wrong with it being a self-supporting mechanism where actually everybody's excited about sharing these things. It's not like you're doing it for, I'm not getting a kickback, from them. No. You're all you want to do is actually go, well, if you like this, you should explore this and you should do that. And if you're interested in this maker, you should look at that maker. And, there's a definite value to, the kind of concept of the rising tide, floating many boats, that you...
Bringing up each other.
Exactly. And we have this fear, don't we, of competition sometimes, and that someone's stealing your idea. And
I mean, there is a bit of that out there, and you just think,
but these people never really last. The people that have stole ideas, they never last, because, again, people buy in. Well, it's only my opinion, but people buy so much into stories and into the people. You can see the bullshitters a mile away.
Yeah,
you can spot them a mile away, and they might make a quick buck, and they might do great on Instagram for a year or two, and then poof, gone.
It's almost like personal branding. Like, I know you.
Yes.
I say, we're going to see Barney. The business name. It's more building on your personal branding. If you put it like, that's what we're trying to create with We Are Makers. It's not just a publication. It's us. It's
who you're buying
doing
from.
It.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the really important things is, who do you sell to? Yeah. And sell to people that actually value these things and understand the scarcity. And if they say, well, actually, no, I want 5,000 bags or 5,000 paintings, or can we squeeze the price down on this to half the price? Just say no.
No.
Yeah.
It's the but that's also difficult. That's also this thing where people can promise you the world. So wait till the money's in the bank.
First.
Yes, exactly. And it's very exciting though, and I think all of this stuff feels daunting, doesn't it? When you're talking about it, and like, actually we think about all the points we've kind of rattled across here. But basically, it's do something you like, and if you do it properly, the arc of actual business success is different to this kind of like. See, I don't normally name brands, but they're so bloody awful. I'm going to. No, it's not. It's not. It's not fair. But there was a gin brand that was hugely famous because they brought out a product called Unicorn Tears, and it was gin liqueur, 150 grams probably of sugar a litre, filled with edible glitter, and they launched it in Harvey Nicks, and it sold out like in a weekend, a couple of thousand bottles straight away. And there's nothing wrong with doing that if you're looking at you like building these brands. There's a place in the marketplace for them. They are of no less value than what we're doing. He says desperately trying to dig himself out of a hole. but that is also the kind of product that will last for a year, and it will make a bag of money.
This is exactly
big bag
my point.
Of money.
And then in 2 years' time, people will be like, whatever happened to that weird company that released the horse tears brand.
Exactly.
That's what will happen.
But, the other thing is going, well, there's nothing wrong if that's the kind of thing that you enjoy doing, of building these kind of brands and doing that. And yes, the financial payoff can be high, but you have to accept that if you're doing something on our scale of things, that your curve of kind of financial success will be a more gradual thing.
Yeah. It's not going to go like this. It's going to go like this. Some like this and then up and then down, but most of the time
a lot like this.
Eventually
like that.
And hopefully it is kind of, hopefully there's a gradual increase, and it's like, you are sat in my dad's house still, 6 years on. But where we've come from to where we are now is just worlds away. And it's not, I kind of feel like I'm prophesizing here, kind of saying this is exactly how to work, because we really don't know. You're feeling your way, and you're feeling that there's some confidence in you, or there's some idea, but we're kind of looking at the next big step, and you go, well, hopefully all our importers will order from us again, and they'll order this, and this will add up towards this, and we've put some money aside because we haven't paid ourselves properly last year, but enough to live on and enough to pay the mortgage, and all of that kind of thing. But there is that kind of drawback to going, this is an investment in our future, so maybe that money we could have put into our mortgage could have put to pay off a bit more of that. Well, you're building that thing for the future, but you still we done it
when we started. We took our house deposit and just threw it at edition 1. And then hoped for the best, and luckily we had a really good Christmas and we got a lot of it back, and we were still able to buy a house.
And there is that feeling of doing stuff by faith still. Like you have to take, it sounds like it's easy for me to talk very confidently here, but it's not that I'm not worrying about stuff, and everything has to be still a calculated risk. There's
we believed in it. I think that's the first thing. You just need to believe in.
I think that's it. I think if you believe in it, like,
you'll make it work.
I've not really been worried or scared about doing anything business wise. I've never really been like, oh, this could ruin us. But I've always been worried that, what if I don't try it? That's always kind of worried me. Like, what if we don't just give it a shot? Because you'll never know.
You'll just be sitting there and be like, I should have done that when I should have.
I'm sitting here selling insurance and I should have done that, but actually now it's too late.
We talked about a very similar concept to all of this when we left uni. And 7 years after that, we started this. Very similar concept. Now, in that instant, I'm glad we waited, because we had, like, you were a maker and we've got so much more experience, and we had the financial backing to do it right at that point. But like, that was 7 years in, and we're like, right, we have to do this. We couldn't have sat on it for any longer. We couldn't have done it.
No.
And I think that's the thing. Sometimes it's we're talking about doing these things, and you don't have to rush it. No. You don't have to kind of. It's not this. There's no nobility in, like, flipping a coin. I'm going to be destitute or successful. That's not a sensible way to live. But you also have to. You do have to take a leap of faith sometimes, and you do have to make that investment. And if you can have some kind of contingency, even if it's that you don't hate your parents enough that they're going to put you up if you can't afford to pay the rent, that's okay. But,
some people think you're absolutely crazy, but then you're like, well,
That's what it is.
We're giving it a go.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's this thing, isn't it, where, again, we're back at this point where we're sat around the table and we're here because we're both interested in what each other do. And actually we want to support that, and we want that to be a thing that has some continuity.
Yeah.
So...
what's that? to 2 hours 18.
2 hours,
gosh.
2 hours 18 minutes.
Yeah.
That's the point. Like, it's 2 hours 18 minutes at all. I can guarantee you now, I would bet my house on it that if you and I had insurance jobs, we wouldn't be sat talking about it for 2 hours and 18 minutes on a podcast. And you wouldn't have people listening to it around the world. It's not
exactly. You know, and 2 hours 18 in, and we still haven't come to the point yet.
Yeah. Not at all. Kate, you've usually got a cracker there question that you've not had a chance to ask yet.
Yeah, what advice would you give your younger self?
God, don't grow dreadlocks. No, it's a really good point. I guess I was quite shy when I was younger, and I think it's that thing of don't be scared to talk to people, and don't be scared to ask for help. You know, it's the world isn't on your shoulders, you know, so actually, you know, just don't worry about it. Yeah.
Don't worry about it, and don't be scared to ask for help. I think don't be scared to ask for help is one that a lot of people should take forward.
And it's a cliche, you know, but it's that, you know, it's don't be scared to fail, you know, as well, that actually we look at people that we idolize, and, you know, so for example, we'll go to the arts world, you look at all of those great old painters, you know, and I was at MoMA in New York a couple of weeks ago because we're out seeing our importers, and I was looking at some of these incredible artists, and you go, well, these people are incredible artists not because they have some innate skill, which they do, yes, but we kind of like to feel that they've somehow just come out of the primordial ooze, totally formed and totally ready and doing amazing stuff. And the truth is that actually most of these great artists went and did apprenticeships for 6 or 7 years. They studied under great masters. They learned all the basic techniques. They learned all of those skills. And then they went and developed their own practice. Can tell I'm from an arts background. But you develop that, and they're standing on that experience that they've had before. But actually, without that experience, you know, and without asking for that help, and without investing that time and that knowledge, you know, it's we're back to this being a teenager and thinking you can change the world with only your thoughts, this kind of arrogance in there. And you have to realize that people are there to help you both learn, but people are also there to help you succeed, you know, and I think that's
even just support, just having someone just go to and have a conversation, just you know, about anything that can help. Oops.
Yeah.
I've been watching that the whole podcast. I've been watching Quinton in case she just knocks her head on it and you've just done it right at the end.
But sorry.
No, I was saying that was a good final. That was a good final.
A good wrap up.
It was very
that.
good.
Yeah. I've enjoyed so much learning about your story.
Yeah.
I can't thank you enough for having us over, showing us
great.
around. It's been phenomenal. I've learnt so much about a drink I didn't even know existed. I've learnt so much about the vast quantities of fruit and the work that goes into that 20 millilitres, 25 millilitres of eau de vin. So yeah, I hope everyone takes as much from it as I have. I wish you all the best of luck. I think you're definitely doing things in the right way because it's your way. I think you got a good thing going here. I really look forward to seeing what the next few years brings.
Well, you know, we're very lucky to do something we love, but it's incredible, you know, talking to people like you and just kind of being placed amongst some of the other people you work with, because I'm in awe of what people can achieve, you know, and I think however obscure or however ridiculous, you know, it's completely inspiring. And I think in this kind of age of, you know, everything being available and everything being easily manufactured, you kind of look at these things and they become ever more special.
Yeah, absolutely. And what a point to wrap it up on.
Yeah.
We'll wrap it up at that, guys.
Yeah.